This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so you're good with the slides to display for Walker and David, right?
Yes, I've got them open and ready to go.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, Ashley. Okay, so I see all the board here. John, are you joined us?
Yes, I have.
I don't see you tonight.
Well, give me a second there. There I am.
There you go. Thought you worried about your COVID hairstyle or something.
Yeah, well, it's the Boris Johnson look. I usually get my semi-annual shearing around the end of March when the weather changes. So
There you
I'm still
go.
due for a couple more weeks. You're gonna have to put up with me for a little longer.
All right. Okay, so I'm ready to go if you are.
Yep, all set.
All right, well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending the West Goshen Township Board of Supervisors workshop meeting of March the 2nd, 2021. To start the meeting, will you please stand if you can and join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. Please be aware this meeting is being recorded this evening using GoToMeeting. So we can have as smooth a teleconference meeting as possible. Please can you observe the following? While listening, please keep yourself on mute to eliminate distracting background noise. Each agenda item requiring a vote will proceed with a motion and a second by a board member, followed first by board member comments and questions, and then second by public comment and questions before a roll call vote is taken. When wishing to speak, please address the meeting chair, myself, requesting to comment and announce your name. There is also an open public comment period at the end of the agenda. I have two announcements to start the meeting. First, the board met in an executive session on February the 25th to discuss personnel matters. And second, I just want to promote the Chester Ridley Creek Watersheds Association is holding its annual creek cleanup this year. It is being held a little earlier than in years past, and it will be on Saturday, March the 20th from 9 till 11:30 a.m. And Sue Brugel leads the effort at the creek behind McDonald's at the intersection of Gay Street and Montgomery Avenue in West Goshen. COVID-19 safety protocols will be practiced, including a mask requirement. And for more information and to register, go to the website, www.crcwatersheds.org. And also there's a prominent link to their website displayed on our township homepage. Do any of the other supervisors have any announcements they wish to share this evening?
I think the only announcement I have, Sean, is the question about whether we're going to have the car show on May 22nd or not, and that we can leave until the public comment section.
Okay, thanks, Hugh. All right then, our first main agenda item tonight is a presentation on the management of the township pension funds and discussion of future investment returns. Together with Hugh, I have had the pleasure of attending several of the pension committee meetings over the last year or so, and thought now would be a good timing for the Board of Supervisors to hear about the work of the committee. Tonight, Walker Tompkins and David Brune, two of the resident advisory board members of the committee, will present a few slides intended to inform the board about the approach to management of the township pension funds, the recent and historical investment performance of the funds, and to make the board aware of a few issues that the pension committee is currently deliberating, but that will ultimately require the board to make decisions on. I do see, other than Walker and David, we have other members of the committee in attendance this evening, but I'm going to let Walker and David introduce them as part of their presentation. So Casey's put up the slide set here, and Walker, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thanks. Walker, you on mute?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sean. And I see Bob Scheller's with us. Bob, welcome. David Brune and I will do the initial presentation. I'm sure Bob can bail us out if we get ourselves into deep water. I'd like to start, if I could go to the next slide, Casey. So tonight, the agenda is an introduction to the pension committee, the organization of the pension process, which I will do. Dave will cover an overview of the quarterly meetings, and then we'll discuss some open items before the committee. Next slide, please. I thought I'd give a little bit of a history on the pension committee because it's interesting, particularly the resident advisory board, and I think Hugh's probably lived through a lot of this, so he can correct me if I'm wrong. But my understanding is that in the late 90s, we had contracts with Aetna for our pension investments. And the Board of Supervisors wasn't really pleased with the returns and was trying to find another way. If we increased our investment returns a little bit, we could get to the 7 or 7.5%, the pension funds might actually be able to be self-funding. So going down that road, we ended up with a resident advisory board, and we moved away from the Aetna contracts. And we initially had a PFM management that was our investment advisor, and they started us off down this process. I think Sharon Lynn was the township manager at that point. And then I came on board after we had had this process in place, and we traditionally had 5 members and an alternate, so we always had a quorum. So that's sort of the background of how this all came about. Everything I'm going to talk about today is based on the investment policy statement. The investment policy statement, which you should all have copies of, really documents the policies, procedures, and controls for the pension plan. Casey, the next slide, please. So the first box at the top would be the Board of Supervisors, and they are the trustees. And obviously, the Board of Trustees is where the buck stops. They have all the responsibility for how the pension plan is run. And again, if you're using the investment policy statement, I'm on the section where responsibilities of the fund's representatives begins. And I'm just basically, these numbers can be traced back to the investment policy statement with probably further better definitions that I'm going to give you tonight. Excuse me. So number 2 would be the administration. So 2 is the internal staff and funds administration. So basically Casey and his staff are responsible for the day-to-day operation of the pension fund. And they also sit on the pension committee. The resident advisory board, which includes Bob Holland, Bob Scheller, Anthony Scarolucci, David Brune, and myself. And then, our representatives, internal staff. So we generally have somebody from each of the 3 funds. The next group, so that's 1, 2. We're up to 4. So the resident advisory board is selected by the Board of Supervisors, and we serve 1-year terms. So we serve at their discretion. Number 5, we move into the fund custodian, also appointed by the trustees. And we have 2, and it's an unusual situation in that Vanguard is our outsourced chief investment officer. They basically can do everything from administering the funds that are given to them from West Goshen Township, to also running the investments, producing the reports. They also have a trust administration or trusteeship that they have, but it's relatively expensive, and we don't currently subscribe to that. To my knowledge, Bryn Mawr Trust at this time, currently at the 4 o'clock side on this, acts as trust administrator, and they just send out checks. The last piece to the puzzle would be the actuary, and he's got the black box that figures out how much the township owes every year pension plan to remain solvent. And I'm about to lose my charge here. And that's basically the way the committee's set up. I can take some questions now, or we can go on to David and talk about the reports.
So do any of the board members have questions about the structure of how the pension funds are administered, who provides the investment advice, or any of the boxes?
Well, let me just ask you, how often should the investment policy and options be reviewed? Is this an annual process, or should we do this on a 5-year basis, or as needed?
So let me just intercept the question for you, Walker. So there's 2 questions there, John. One is, how often should we look at the investment policy, which is this document that Walker's referring to? I think I heard the other question embedded in there, John, was around the actual investment portfolio. So Walker, why don't you describe the answer to the first question, and then when David does his piece, I think John will get an appreciation for how the investments are monitored.
Okay. The investment policy is reviewed, has to be reviewed every 5 years. But as markets change and as the fund changes, we'll review it on a more frequent basis. It was just done, I believe, in 2018. So the policy that you're reviewing right now was run through the process for the year 2018.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Well, if it's all right, Sean, maybe I'll pick it up from here.
Yeah, go ahead, David. Thank you. Thank you, Walker.
Fantastic. Thanks. Thanks everyone for giving us an opportunity to talk about the pension and the pension committee. Hey, Casey, why don't you flip to the next page if you would. And just one other comment about the IPS, and I think we're going to talk about this maybe even later on. So the IPS is our guide to help us coordinate our efforts with Vanguard. And when the thought is that we would need to change something either within the instructions to Vanguard or as far as our comfort level with how the portfolio is being managed, that would necessitate a change to the IPS, even though it wasn't on that cycle. We would actually, as the the advisory committee, we'd come to the supervisors and ask them to review and then possibly make a change or not, and then we would then communicate that to Vanguard. So what I wanted to do tonight is really talk about our quarterly meetings, and the goal for me is not to present the material. It's really to present what's being presented to the committee. So it's kind of like the second deviation of the presentation. So what you see here is an agenda, and we get together with Vanguard on a quarterly basis, and we go through all of these different pieces of the agenda. They talk about how the market's performed. We review the asset allocation and performance. We look at the individual holdings. We look at how they performed. We look at how they perform versus the benchmark. We're given an opportunity to ask questions, to reflect on what the market outlook is, what how that affects or may affect the ability of the portfolio to meet its long-term goals. And really, it's not necessarily so focused on the short term. I mean, obviously we want to have good performance, but really it's more, is the portfolio doing what we need it to do over a longer period of time? Because as we all know, in the near term, markets can be extremely volatile. So Casey, if you don't mind, maybe flip to the next page, and I'll go through this pretty quickly. But what I did was I pulled out a couple of pages from the presentation. The presentation can actually be quite long. So what I did was I tried to pull out a few pages that were give you a good example of what we review with Vanguard. So if Casey, if you could maybe get that back up there, that would be great. There we go. So this page here shows you, and this is for the police pension, but we look at it for all three. On the bottom part, I'll start with that. It's very important that Vanguard manages the portfolio within the guidelines of the investment policy statement. So we want the asset allocation to be consistent with what we've asked them to do. So we're going to confirm that on an ongoing basis. And we also have worked very diligently with Vanguard in the parameters around when they would rebalance, given volatility in the market, when they would rebalance back to that asset allocation. There's a couple of things that happen throughout the year. One is that markets ebb and flow, and the other is that there's money going out for the pensioners and also money coming in from the township. And so Vanguard is tasked with keeping all of those, while all of those are happening, one part of their job is to manage to the target allocation. And then also what we look at, this is a little bit broader picture, but we look at the returns of the portfolios over time. And to me, one of the biggest takeaways is if you look at the upper right-hand corner of this particular chart, it shows you that the inception returns have been above that of the actuarial expectations. So that's a really fantastic result. It means that the township over time has had to put in less money because the returns have been better than the actuary has used in terms of looking forward. Casey, flip to the next page. Along with looking on the more macro stuff, we're also looking a little bit more micro. So we're looking at the individual holdings within the portfolio. What is their allocation? How are they being allocated? How have they performed? So this just gives you the weights and the values, but there's another page within the presentation that literally gets into the performance of all of these different asset classes, all of the different holdings, and how they performed against both a broad benchmark and an individual benchmark. And it's actually one of the more recent things that we discovered is that one of the funds within the portfolio had some performance numbers that were not in line with what we would have expected them to be. And so we asked Vanguard to come back to do a little research, to come back with a recommendation to look at the one fund, and let us know whether or not that's something that we should continue to hold. So that oversight, again, I'm trying to give you an idea of the oversight that we're providing. Vanguard is bringing the information to us. We're reviewing it with them and asking questions about that. The next page is one of the things that I talked about earlier, is the cash flow summary. So I did talk a little bit about this, but it's also important to look at money going in, coming out, making sure that, we want to make sure that that's consistent with the numbers that we're aware of, that Casey has a chance to look at them at least on a quarterly basis. I'm sure he's looking at them much more than that. But this is a chance for us to really sit down and take a look at those numbers, ask questions about the flows and things like that. And then finally, the next page, one of the things that we've tasked Vanguard with, and we're going to talk about this next, is what is the likelihood that we're going to be able to make that 7% return that the actuary is using. And so they've done some studies for us based on a number of different asset allocations, different portfolio makeup. And so it's really important that we have a portfolio, number one, that we think we have a good chance of meeting those return expectations. But number two, we don't want to take on too much risk because of the near-term volatility in the market. So it's always a balancing act. And that's where we really rely on Vanguard to provide us the advice of how do you allocate the portfolio in a way that's consistent with your goals. How do you, within the allocations of equities and bonds and cash, how do you invest those different pieces? And within that, how do you choose the different areas of the market within it, whether it be small cap stocks or large cap stocks? That's where we rely on Vanguard to help us out, to give us that advice on how to how to meet those goals and those expectations. So with that, I mean, I downloaded a lot of information. Why don't I pause to see if there's any questions about any of these charts?
So let me kick it off with a couple of questions. Actually, my question really is more for the township right now. So having kind of digested the situation here, if we go back to the how this is all structured, my question for Casey and staff really is, you know, I've got a good feel for the work of Vanguard and what they're providing. What about Bryn Mawr Trust and the actuary? How many years have we been with the same provider? Are we sure it's a cost-effective service? Have we bid anything out in the last few years for that service? Is there anything there that needs a little bit of a refresh or attention from where we've been historically?
From my perspective, we've been with Bryn Mawr Trust since well before me, so at least 15 years. It's a very low-cost service to the pension plan. It's entirely paid out of the pension. We spend between $2,000 and $3,000 per year for their services. They cut all of the pension checks for all of our retirees. They now issue the police drop checks when those retirements happen. So it's a very low-cost service. We have found their service. I've found their service to be very good. They're very responsive, and they're in touch with us immediately if there are any issues. To my knowledge, there has never been a missed pension payment or a mistake in their bookkeeping. They're the first ones to know if a pensioner has passed away, maybe who's moved to California or Florida, and we've lost track with them. They're the first to know, and they notify us of the person who's passed away. Conrad Siegel has been our actuary for probably at least 20 years. They're the preeminent actuary in Pennsylvania. Again, we've received excellent service from them. And again, very low cost. They're as needed. So when we have an employee who's coming up on retirement age, they will do the pension calculation for us, draft all the paperwork that's necessary. We don't spend a lot of money with them annually, and I explicitly trust their guidance. We try to have Dave Killick from Conrad Siegel in once a year to talk with the pension committee for any actuary-related questions. Of course, we didn't do it last year because of COVID. We'll try to do it sometime this year virtually. But again, it's a very low-cost service, and we've received excellent benefits from them and excellent service.
David's going to get into it in a minute relative to some of the forward-looking questions that might need both the pension committee and board consideration in the months or year ahead here. Does the actuary provide the type of what-if service in terms of analysis of potential different scenarios on forward returns and what its impact would be to the township's MMO contributions? Is that something they would offer, or would we have to go elsewhere to get that kind of service?
Yeah, they can do all of that analysis, and they have in the past. They also get involved at our request if we need evaluation based on a police contract item that comes up. They were helpful during the drop ordinance process to review that and to look at any items that the board may want to for contract negotiations. So they're pretty much an expert, subject matter expert that we would rely on, and we have. Even if if the board wants to make a change, for example, when the board changed the non-uniform pension with the contributions a few years ago, they did an analysis on the impact to the MMO and to the overall pension plan. So they're a subject matter expert that the board can rely on.
Okay, thanks, Casey.
Sure.
Other board members, do you have questions for Walker, David, or township staff?
Yeah, I'll have a couple, Sean. I don't know who to address this to, so whomever could best answer, please do. What's the current funding ratio of the retirement plans? I believe there's 3 of them. Are they separated also? We have a police pension, you have an admin, employees pension, and then you have a sewer employees pension. Are they treated and looked at individually as separate entities? And if so, what are the current funding ratios of each of them?
They
John.
are,
Yeah, go ahead.
they are looked at as three separate portfolios, but if you look at their asset mix, they're all very similar. So they're managed in a similar method, following the same methodology, but they are distinct portfolios.
And that's really because the actuarial return assumptions are the same for both. So it would make sense that they would have the same, a similar, or basically identical portfolio, but we review them separately.
Okay. And how are they funded? What's the funding ratio right now of each of them, or all of them then? How well are they funded compared to their liabilities? The funding ratio.
They're typically in the low 90s, high 80s, low 90s. It pretty much changes almost on a daily basis. So we can forward that information. I will check with the actuary, and I can forward that information to the board tomorrow.
All right, thank you.
So there are several levers to the funding ratio, and if the market's up up a lot, obviously your funding ratio is going to look very good. But if the market is, if it's way down, you're not going to look quite as well. It was well funded.
But even just to get a snapshot idea of where we're at as far as the funding ratio would be worthwhile.
I've seen the portfolios quoted to me anywhere between 88 and 95%.
I think I can address John's question a little bit there. We're essentially 100% funded, John.
Okay.
The way the thing has run over the years, we're not in the shape that the state is, for example.
Yeah, the market returns have been well above. I mean, if you go back to that page 6, the 3-year returns are almost 10%, and the 5-year returns are above 10%. So that the market has outperformed expectations to say the least. Yeah,
last year. My next question: what's a legally mandated minimum funding ratio? Is there 100% requirement that the fund should strive for? Is that legally mandated as opposed to an ERISA formula?
Yeah. I mean, there are milestones that public pensions have to meet. Once you get down into the 60, 50, even 70% funded, as soon as the state auditor general finds out that your pension fund is in that kind of not dangerous territory, but lower funded territory, you have to come up with it's called distressed, and the municipality has to come up with a plan to fix the distressed level of funding, which means they can force you to raise taxes, do other things to bring your funding level up. But we've obviously West Goshen has never been in that position.
And so the 7% return on investment portfolio, that's what is the calculation for, or what is felt to be required in order for these pensions to meet their minimum obligations. Is that where the 7% amount came from?
I think it's the other way around, John. The situation is that you have a target for what your investment pool of money, your funds, are expected to return in the forward years as you look ahead. And then based on that assumption, that goes into the actuarial calculations, taking into account the number of pension beneficiaries, their age, the pension amount that they will receive, and the rules and requirements of the pension that they're going to get. And then that calculation then determines what the minimum obligation or funding that the township might need to make on an annual basis, and it's part of what we have been putting in the budgets. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, yeah. Well, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for where did the 7% pile come from? So basically, then, if the plans, let me say this and tell me if I'm correct or not from my understanding. If the funds maintain a 7% return, then basically the pension funds are self-funding. Is that a fair statement?
No.
Based upon liabilities?
No, there's still a portion of township funding that has to happen. And remember, it's a mix of investment returns, state aid that we do receive per employee. We get 1 unit per non-uniform employee and 2 units of aid for each police officer. So you mix all of those together to come up with the MMO on a yearly basis from the actuary.
Yeah, the 7% is an assumed rate of return that the actuary plugs into all the other pieces.
Right.
That in and of itself is, I think, is always the question. I mean, look, there's so many unknowns. How many pensioners, how long will they live, when will they retire? And the return is an unknown. And part of what we struggle with from the committee standpoint and from Vanguard standpoint is, will the portfolio be able to make that 7% return? If it does better, that's great, because that's just reduce the MMO because the returns are higher. If it does worse, that's not so good. And I think that's where all of us, as as we look at these funds, I think that's where we're struggling a little bit. The returns recently have been well above the long-term historical average, and the concern is at what point will they be below, and what does that do to the ability of the pension fund to meet its obligations, and then what in turn does that do to the township's requirement to contribute and the funding level.
Yeah, that's an excellent issue, and that's really what, if we go to the last slide, David, maybe you could tee up the whole overview here around what we have to consider when we look at whether, as we look forward, and what returns we might expect given where we are today with equities and bonds and fixed income returns. As we look ahead, how realistic is this continued ability to achieve the 7%?
Yeah, so let me preface this with the we had this very similar conversation with the actuary, and I guess it was probably 2 or 3 years ago. Maybe you can correct me. And we asked the same question. What's the ability? Is the portfolio going to be able to make the 7% return? Is that still a reasonable number? And it's important to note that the answer that we received from the actuary is that they look at it very differently than I think the pension committee is looking at it. They're looking at the 7% return as a 30-year number, and we're looking at, and when you look at Vanguard's number, some of the things we're looking at, a lot of, including Vanguard, their expectations for returns are over the next 10 years. And one of the things that I think is a concern of ours, if Casey, go back to page 9. So on page 9, you can see there's different return assumptions there, greater than 2 all the way up to greater than 8. If you look across the greater than 7% return line, for any of these portfolios that we looked at, they're giving it anywhere from a 14 to a 20% chance of making that 7% return. So that means that it's not 0, but it's certainly not anywhere near 100 that they think that we're actually going to hit 7. So over the next 10 years, Vanguard believes that the returns are going to be much lower than they've been over the last 10 years. But over the next 30 years, hey, you know what, we may hit that 7%. The question really comes in, how much pain is there going to be in the next 10 years if we don't hit the 7, and what, if anything, can we do about it? And that's where we get back to that page 10, which is, what, if anything, should we or can we do about it? And there's a couple of things that we can do. One is we can shift to a higher equity allocation, because the expectations are that equities are going to do much better than bonds. That clearly brings in a whole nother piece of, well, we're taking on greater near-term volatility risk. Do we reduce the actuarial return assumptions? Do we take it from 7 to 6.5%? Maybe we're not comfortable with a higher equity allocation, but maybe we want to reduce the actuarial assumptions down slightly so that that may smooth out the payments over time and not maybe hit the township with a really big payment over a much shorter period of time. And that's an actuarial question, so I don't want to get into that, but if that's something we should, if the supervisors want to move forward, that's where we're going to get with the actuary and say, okay, run some of these scenarios. Let's figure out what this all looks like. And then finally, which is that's separate but similar, is we do have a proposal. This should have been, I apologize, I put this together. This should have been item number 2, really. Vanguard proposal for actively managed funds. That's a separate proposal that they've made to us in terms of some of the funds within the portfolio that we're reviewing that still needs to be vetted out. But all of it goes to how do we increase our confidence level that we're going to hit whatever the actuarial return assumptions are, whether it's 6.5 or 6 3/4 or 7. How do we do that? And those are the questions that are still pending in front of the group.
Nicely teed up, David. Thank you. Just sharing kind of one of the concerns of how this comes to life a little bit for me is on the board. When we, back in when we set the budget for 2020, so at the end of 2019, the actuary did the calculation and we had an MMO contribution for the funds and it was put in the budget. And then last year when we set the budget for this year, so 2020, the actuary is then looking at the state of the portfolios as of the end of 2018. Now, I don't know why it's back that far and isn't just 1 year back, but that's the number that's used. And because of the market situation at the end of 2018, it was, one of these volatile periods when the market was down. And so the calculation that came out of that had a relatively significant jump for the township's MMO contribution for 2021. So it probably doubled in size. So it was several $100,000 more this year than it was in the previous year, again, based on the calculations of the way the investment portfolio had performed in the years that were being looked at. So that kind of relatively large change in the MMO is something that has made me wonder about what are those consequences when returns maybe don't meet the 7% return expectation, or that we have a period of it's a couple of years of depressed equity markets and low returns on our income, on our fixed income portfolio. So I'm just concerned that given the other demands on our revenue for the things we fund in the township, that a period of time of significant MMO contributions could have a negative impact on some of the things we're trying to accomplish with our infrastructure or whatever else. So that's one of the reasons why we're having this conversation today. And maybe we need to engage the actuary to look at some of these what if scenarios. But I just wanted to share that with the other board members and make my pain your pain.
Just one other clarification. Back with the change in the investment, the IPS policy statement, we shifted from a 60-40 portfolio because Vanguard, it was deemed that Bryn Mawr Trust had enough cash to meet our cash needs, so that Vanguard liquidated its cash position. And they've come back, their way to meet cash needs now for Bryn Mawr when they pass the funding over is to sell securities. But when we did that in the investment policy statement, we shifted from a 60% equity, 40% fixed income portfolio to a 65-35. So the portfolio now, I think if you look at our numbers, it's now 65-35. So I don't know if you want to go to going to a 70-30 equity fixed. That to me is a little bit risky, but anyway.
So what, obviously if there's other questions from the supervisors, fire away, but what I would suggest as a way forward really is to have the pension committee continue to evaluate the Vanguard proposal on its actively managed funds and make assess those and make a recommendation back to the board as to whether to accept it or not. And similarly for whether there should be any shift in the equity allocation, let the pension committee deliberate that and work with Vanguard, and then come to the board with kind of a 1 and 2 items to make a recommendation and see if the board supports those recommendations. The return on the actuarial return assumption, reduce the actuarial return assumptions, that is an issue. I think I need to get a little bit more understanding with the actuary, and maybe a conversation with the actuary in the near future would help understand that picture a little bit better. I don't have a full appreciation for what it all means at this point. So that's my recommendation on the way forward. So,
John, if we do decide to take that route, would we be inviting the actuary to a public meeting?
Casey, how does that work? In terms of would we just be asking staff to talk to the actuary about some what-if scenarios? How does it work in terms of it needing to be a public deliberation?
Yeah, that would be a change within the pension plan. So we would have to go through. We would start off with board consensus on the different scenarios you'd want to look at. If the pension committee wanted to look at 6.75%, 6.5%, the actuary can run all of those numbers and see what effect it will have on the MMO. They'll get it down to the penny. And then the investment policy statement would have to be changed. And I'd have to check to see if that 7% actuarial assumption is actually in our pension ordinance or pension documents. We may have to update those. And then those have to be submitted to the IRS for ultimate approval if that would happen.
So
that would be
not
down the
something
road.
overnight by any means.
Yeah, that's down the road. So
Yeah.
actually, to your question, if we wanted to do that what-if scenario analysis, we could talk about it at the next time we review this, and then it would be in a public meeting, and then Casey would get the actuary to do that analysis, and we would then discuss it.
okay, and I just want to make sure that the pension committee will be working with Vanguard, and that whatever decision that you might come to and recommend to the board, that we have details about what Vanguard, what input Vanguard had in that decision as well. So.
Yeah. So Hugh, obviously you've been a long-standing member of the committee and have deep insights into where we are and where we've been, and maybe what the future might hold. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that we're doing exceptionally well, and that you should listen to the pension committee, that we are very fortunate in West Goshen to have some individuals who have a very, very good background in these items, in this area. Between Walker and Dave and all of them are just outstanding people, that we would, if we had to hire them, I hate to think what it would do to our budget. But
thanks, Hugh. So
I think that as far as the 7% goes, I would listen to them, but my gut feeling is that we could hang on to the 7% for another 6 months and see. To bring in the actuary, I don't know that would serve anything. He's basically a number cruncher as opposed to somebody who provides guidance. Once he crunches the numbers and gives us those numbers, and then we can go from there. Again, with the expertise that we have on the committee, I think that it would mean much more to them some people that aren't familiar with finance will have difficulty understanding or getting the connections between the various numbers. So I don't see a real need or benefit really to have an actuary come in unless we're going to have a class on what an actuary does.
Okay, thank you, Hugh. Appreciate your insights. So if there's no more board questions at this point, I would like to hear from anyone from the public, having heard the conversation. If you have any observations or thoughts you would like to share, now's your chance.
Hi, good evening. This is Margie Swart.
Go ahead, Margie.
Could someone just offer a little background as to why there's a separate sewer and admin and road fund, why they aren't combined? Does anyone know that?
No, that goes back probably 40 years. I don't know.
I know the sewer was separate because it was a separate entity, and
Correct.
that was done obviously for tax purposes. The police pension fund obviously is state mandated, and the admin and roads is, you know, the rest of the staff. So
Yeah.
there are legal reasons as to why they're separate.
Casey, is the sewer pension plan funded through the sewer revenues?
Yes, but not the authority. It's sewer operating money, so that's probably why it's separate.
Okay, then a follow-up to that is, how does that, when the admin employees that contribute to the sewer pension plan, because I know there's certain finance and management admin that pay a portion of their pension goes into the sewer plan. So what happens when they retire? Are they getting two separate checks, one from the sewer pension and one from the admin?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. And then also, now that it's been 3 years and all 5 of the first drop participants have retired, I think it would be helpful that the board sees exactly what, how much each of those officers received for the drop payout, and how much that is going to cost us in the future, because before you know it, we will be into negotiating another police contract the end of 2022, but hopefully we'll start on that much sooner than we did the last time around when it was done at the 11th hour, because I do believe that is contributing to this larger MMO. So if you could just look into that, I think that would be helpful. That's all I have for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Margie. Are there any other questions or comments from the public attending? Okay, hearing none, I do want to echo what Hugh said, and you know, Bob Scheller, if you want to say something, that's fine too. But I just want to thank all of you, Walker, David, and Bob, and the other members of the Residents Advisory Board that have done such an outstanding job. And you look at these 12, 13-year compound returns working with Vanguard of 7.9%. That's fabulous, and it's a credit to your efforts and your diligence in managing that process so far. So heartfelt thanks to you all, and to Hugh as well. So thanks everyone, and thank you for tonight in presenting the material, Walker and David.
You're very welcome. Thank you for the compliment.
Okay, so we're going to move on our agenda. Next up is agenda item number 4, discussion and possible approval of phase 2 for the Woodlands at Greystone residential subdivision project based on the 2017 subdivision and land development approval. So who's walking us through this one, Casey?
We'll have Rick. He's done the full review on the plan and give some history. Again, this is based on the 2007 board approved plan. This is now the phase 2 plan. So Rick, it's all yours.
Okay, this plan has been split up by the developer into 3 phases, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. The plan that you see on your screen shows the 3 different phases. Phase 1 is a hatched area, which shows up as kind of a lighter gray. Phase 2 shows up as a lighter white color, and the phase 3 is the darker gray that's not hatched. So the project is split up into 3 phases. Phase 1 is underway now. The approval for phase 1 was given a couple of years ago. That part of the project is not yet complete, but the developer wants to proceed to phase 2, which again consists of 3 areas shown in the whiter color here on the plan. The overall plan has been approved since 2016, and the purpose of this is basically to approve the 2nd phase and some incidental items that go along with that, such as ADA ramps that came up as an issue in phase 1. I believe there are a number of folks on the call from the developer. If they have something to add to that. I'd also add too that the County Planning Commission had no comments basically on the phase 2 plan.
Thanks, Rick.
I'm going to jump in for a second and just say that it's a little different because the overall total plan received, as Rick mentioned, final land development approval. So this started with a conditional use approval. That conditional use agreement or conditional use order, had been amended. There was a very detailed preliminary plan for the entire development, all 598 homes, and then that did receive final plan approval. So after the developer or the family, the Jarakian family is actually the entity that took it through the land development approval. Mr. Reeser came in and his development company wanted to phase it out in terms of spreading out the cost of construction. So they put phasing plans, is what we'll call these plans. And the phase 1 plans were already approved and security posted, and that's what's under construction. This plan is really a phasing plan showing you what's in phase 2 and what they've submitted development agreements, financial security, and a bond, a performance bond to cover the quasi-public improvements and quasi-public improvements that must be constructed within phase 2. So it's a little bit different because the overall plan set has already been and received approval. This is really just to let them post the necessary security to begin constructing any of the improvements in phase 2.
Thanks, Kristen. Bill Reiser, do you want to say a few words, or anyone else on your team?
This is Lou, Sean. I don't know if Bill's going to speak or not, but I can answer any questions. I think Kristen and Rick have accurately summed it up. I mean, this is just to allow us to proceed with recordation so they can start building the 2nd phase of lots for Greystone. Bill, I don't know whether you had anything to add to what I thought it was a pretty succinct explanation of what we're doing here.
No, I don't have anything to add. It is simply allowing us to record some lots and proceed with the development or the completion of the development of the phase 2 area.
Okay, thanks, Bill. So Board of Supervisors, do you have any questions for Rick or Lou or Bill tonight?
Yeah, I have a question. We had a meeting back in, I think it's February the 10th. There were several items there. I believe there were 21 of them specifically that our 10-step engineer had questions about. As part of the resolution of that meeting was, I believe Lou was going to come up with a resolution document giving us a timeline on the resolution and completion of all those items. I know some of them have been done, such as the temporary fencing along the dam and boarding up the boathouse but there's several other items beyond that. Are there anything that's still outstanding, Rick, in your mind at this point before we should proceed?
Well, there are, but what we need to realize is there's a differentiation between plan items and conditional use items. And the plan items that were being addressed under phase 2 were the handicap ramp access items and the deeds of dedication for the streets. Those have been satisfactorily addressed and added to the plans. The other items that you're referring to are all conditional use items. And I believe a letter has been prepared by Mr. Calagreco to provide a time frame for resolving those issues.
That's right,
Yeah,
Bill. I think that, I'm sorry, Kristen, I think that what we discussed is, as Rick said, that'll probably be on your next meeting agenda. Excuse me, something in my throat. That'll probably be in your next meeting agenda for later this month. But that was a broader issue revisiting some of the other non-phase 2 related items at Greystone. So it's coming. We've been back and forth with the staff and the solicitor.
Yeah, and I think we're there. I mean, Lou and I actually had a call right before this meeting started. He had drafted a letter. I've shared that with staff. We had comments back and forth, and we do want that to come before the board to keep you posted. The conditional use order, this was one thing I was not totally clear on the last time we met, John, was that the conditional use decision specifically had a condition that if some of the timing that was set forth for various improvements to be completed, if that timing needed to be modified because of field conditions or whatever reason, it did not require the conditional use hearings to be reopened, that it was something that the board could approve. And so under that particular provision of the conditional use order, Mr. Calagreco did draft a letter explaining where the timing has been not totally in adherence to the conditional use order and what the reasons were, and proposes a different time frame that Mr. Craig has reviewed and I think feels comfortable with. But we will discuss that with you, provide that letter to you well in advance of your meeting, and make sure you're comfortable with that to approve that at a future state. But it was really my recommendation that those issues really relate to the conditional use approval, not the phase 2 plans.
All right, thank you.
Does anyone else on the board have questions at this time?
No, not from me.
Okay. I have one question, Mr. Calagreco. It's related to a similar thing in terms of this time it's with the sewer authority. There was an agreement about a sewer main over on Andrews Drive, I believe, that needed to be enlarged in size, and there was an agreement as to when that work would be done. Does the letter or the information you're being provided to the township, does that give a new timeline for when that work will be done, or is that something that you've still got to determine?
I think, Sean, so far we're on schedule with that. It was supposed to be completed, the sewer work was supposed to be completed before the 400th use and occupancy permit or before February of next year, whichever comes sooner. My guess is February of next year will come sooner than the issuance of the 400th use and occupancy permit. But as recently as today, I saw email back and forth with the sewer authority about getting the necessary DEP Part 2 permit for that work to commence. So, knock on wood, I think that's on schedule. That is not a deadline that we're proposing on asking for an extension of on this letter that you'll be seeing over the next week.
Okay, great. Thanks for the explanation.
You're welcome.
Okay, so board, I'm looking now, if there are no other questions, for a motion to approve the phase 2 plan for Woodlands at Greystone.
I'll make that motion. Or I'll second it.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second, Hugh and John. Are there any other board comments or questions on the motion?
Just one last comment. Will we have to go through the same process for phase 3?
Yes, John, but we're going to start a little bit earlier for phase 3.
I was just going to make that suggestion.
Yep.
Thank you.
You're going to see phase 3 sooner than later. Thank you.
Are there any other board questions? Are there any questions from the public?
Hi, this is Margie Swart. I have a number, please.
Go ahead, Margie.
As a member of the public who is looking forward to that 18-month completion of the parks, I remember discussions if the board was to create the neighborhood improvement district, one of the benefits would be all those public improvements would be complete by September 2020. Where does that stand? And specifically, I also, when I zoomed in on this map, I see there's a 5-year plan for the Barrens area. So why did it all of a sudden jump to 5 years out for that?
I can speak to both of those probably a little less intelligently on the second issue. The way back when, and the current developer really didn't have much to do with this, but way back when the Jarahians got the plan approved, I think you're talking about the Serpentine Barrens area. There was a DEP had some 5-year protocol for how that area was supposed to be cleaned out, restored. I think there was some burning involved. I think that process has begun, although Ray Grahowski, our project manager, is on the line. I believe he can speak to that in more detail. As to the first issue, the improvements in the area that should be dedicated as the public park are coming along. Pursuant to the applicable decisions, we're supposed to be in a position to have those improvements done, and by that I mean the trails and whatnot, I think by the 200th use and occupancy permit. And I think we're at the 67th use and occupancy permit now. So hopefully we can pick up a lot of time and speed this summer. We got delayed a little bit here because of the weather. It set us back. It's going to set us back a couple more weeks. It was an unanticipated longer winter, but it's moving as quickly as it can. And the NID funding was very helpful in accelerating that schedule. Ray, I don't know if you have anything more on that that Serpentine Barrens 5-year restoration program. I believe that's what Ms. Swart might be referring to.
Yes, this is Ray Grahowski. The 5-year program was always that way from the beginning, and it was staged over such a long period of time because there's a series of burn backs that has to happen each year. And I know that Natural Lands Trust is talking with the township with regard to managing that area. We met earlier this year and we've already cleared a path all the way around the perimeter of the Barrens and identified what trees and what vegetation has to be removed. So the 5-year plan was always there. That was part of the original permit. And we're currently working with Natural Lands Trust to further that program. The spring comes, we'll probably do another area of clearing into the phase 2.
Okay, and then the bike path or walking path that's runs along Aram Avenue, is that currently open to the public?
Well, technically it shouldn't be. It's not dedicated, but I hear people are working on it, so.
Yeah, that's actually not being dedicated to the township. That's HOA property. We're not getting that. So it's technically private property still.
But once the Aram Avenue is dedicated, will that be public?
That's a good question.
It's HOA property. It's not township property, so we don't have any say over it.
Huh.
Well,
all right.
The trail is 100% complete. It's been inspected by the township inspectors. We have right now no problem with the public utilizing that trail. In fact, they have been. Our concern is that we'd like to dedicate the road as soon as possible, and as well as any trails or things that the public would like to use. So we continue to pursue the development as rapidly as we can. We did have COVID over the last summer, which caused some issues with staff, or with our staffing and our ability to complete some of the things that we wanted to get done. But the trail is done. The road is complete. Both are being used by the public, even though they are currently privately held and not dedicated to the township.
Okay, thank you. And I think I have just one more off the top of my head. I recall during the discussions of the NID process that the carriage house was not going, that was going to be part of the NID district. But according to tax records, it looks like it is still part of the mansion, or whatever you call that, the home, the mansion property, and that is not separately being taxed or assessed NID fees. So can anyone speak to that?
I cannot speak to that. I'd have to go back and take a look at the NID. I have no reason to doubt what you're saying. I just wouldn't be in a position to answer whether it should or shouldn't be included, or whether it was or wasn't included.
I do know it hasn't been recorded as a lot yet.
But it is intended to. I just remember that it was discussed that it would be separate and it would be part of the NID district.
Okay, I mean, we'll go back and take a look at that, but that's, I wasn't prepared to speak to that tonight. I apologize.
Okay. And then I'm sorry, one last, and I mean it for good. $1 million, I recall that was also another condition. If the township created the NID, the developer was going to donate $1 million to the township. When will the township see that?
I don't know what the trigger is, Margie, in the decision, but I'm sure the decision spells out when those funds have to be paid to the township, and whenever it is, it is. Again, I don't have the decision in front of me. I wasn't prepared to go through the whole development tonight, just the phase 2 plans.
Okay.
I could just add that the rationale for the $1 million was to provide capital to buy equipment, potentially hire staff or whoever it might be to manage the park. So, you know, it makes the most sense to me is when the park is completed and dedicated to the township, that those funds would be provided. Although we certainly will stand behind whatever agreements that were made at the time, which I can't recall either, as to when those funds were to be contributed.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you very much.
I believe the conditional use stated at park dedication.
That makes sense.
Yep, sure
Thanks,
does.
Stacy. That makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Are there any other, thank you, Margie. Are there any other questions from the public? Hearing none, we're ready for a roll call vote of the supervisors, starting with Ashley.
Aye.
John Hellman,
Aye.
Hugh,
Aye.
Robin, Robin, are you on mute?
All right, yeah, I've been on mute, having good behavior today. Yeah, I said aye.
Thank you. And Sean says aye. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Hugh. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for the staff and the board to taking this under consideration this evening. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you. All right, moving along on the agenda. We are now up to agenda item number 5, continued discussion of Westchester University overlay zoning ordinance. So just to kick this off, and then I'll hand it over to Kristen. So my recollection is that at our last meeting on February the 16th, we took the time to bring ourselves back up to speed on the intention behind the overlay zoning district and the ordinance. We discussed the issue of master planning in the absence of the borough's participation in this overall endeavor. And we also identified several issues that the board wanted to continue deliberation on. And I think, Kristen, you've given this a little bit more thought, and maybe you can give us some guidance here around the outstanding issues from your perspective.
Sure. So I went to put pen to paper and just sort of go back and try to make sure the ordinance reflected what you talked about on the 16th, and I realized I don't think I had all the answers. So I don't want to presuppose that I know what a majority of the board wants to happen. So the first was just defining student housing. What I took away from the meeting was that you were comfortable if student housing was defined to be either owned by the university, an affiliate of the university, or a private entity, provided that the private entity has some contractual arrangement with the university. The way the definition was worded in the draft that was last reviewed by the Planning Commission and the County Planning Commission, I didn't love the language. I think it wasn't as tight as it could have been. It said, as far as the relationship between the university and a private entity, it was that it was recognized and approved by the university for student housing by a private entity. And that really doesn't make a lot of sense. That's too vague in my opinion. So if we're going to have it be that a student housing is a use that's allowed in the PUC4, which is again what I assumed you wanted, I would prefer it to read that it is, if it's owned by a private entity, it has to either be leased to or managed by the school, college, or university. So that again would have the tie-in between the private entity building the building and again having either the university have a management agreement in place where they would provide RAs, they would provide security from the Westchester University Police, there would be some management contract in place. So that's my proposal. If that's, and again, I just want to make sure that's consistent with what a majority of the board wants as far as defining the use. I had to go back and just take a look at whether under the state laws, defining a use based on the ownership and who the owner is appropriate. And I think I'm comfortable with that. All of the uses really in this districts or in these overlay districts are really defined by the fact that they're owned by a university. So I am comfortable with that. And that's really the first question to throw it out there to the board if that's what how they would like to define the use. So this would prohibit, Luxor, for example, who has no contractual relationship with the university, they would not be able to come in and try to build a multifamily building that's rented to students. They'd have to have a contract in place with the university. You heard BET's representatives and the university's representatives, and they're all on this meeting tonight, indicate that they have been in conversations and they have had discussions and they are comfortable with that. Obviously, they'll have to, follow through and enter some sort of contractual arrangement, and they'll have to provide that as evidence that they meet the definition if in fact this moves forward. So Sean, I don't know if you want me to lay out all the questions or just go through each one and sort of get your feedback.
Let's take one at a time, Kristen, so that way we can chunk it up a little bit. So board thoughts, comments on what Kristen has just described?
Yeah, I just have a question. Did we leave it off at the last meeting that BET said that they would be open to establishing a new contract with the university between the Edge and the university, as well as the new proposed student housing building?
I did not hear that.
Are they on the call at all?
Allison is.
Good evening.
Hi, Allison.
Hi, Ashley. I don't think we specifically addressed the Edge. I don't know that my client would necessarily have an issue with it, but we'd have to figure out whether we could work out something contractually with the university. Currently, it is privately owned and operated.
Okay.
I mean, currently, right now, the Edge is a non-conforming use in the zoning district that exists today. So.
Get it? If I could speak, this is Brian. Good evening, everyone. The university did not have any expectation of that. We were, basically the idea and concept was that the university would be working collaboratively with BET on the new project that would be planned for the district. And, with the language that Kristen just reviewed, we would just, I'm sure both Allison and myself would just want the opportunity to review that language and weigh in. And otherwise, it sounds like it's generally in the right direction if the board is okay with what Kristen had proposed.
So other questions from the board related to student housing language?
I think the way that Kristen laid it out, I think is my understanding of what the consensus of the board was from the last meeting when we addressed this issue, and that is we wanted to see a contractual relationship between Westchester University and a private developer. If there was any student housing to be built in the PUC4 area, that would include having presence of the university there in the form of resident assistants, as well as having the Westchester University Police having primary jurisdiction, and also they would have some kind of shuttle arrangement going into the center of town. So that was the concern that I had, and I think the other members of the board, I think we all found consensus there. There had to be some kind of written contractual relationship between the university and any private developer to build private student housing in PUC4. So then the next question, I think, well, I'll just leave it with that. All right, that'll finish my comment on that.
Sean, may I please comment on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's a good point that John makes, which is that, you know, we talked about a couple of different options, and I don't think BET or the university necessarily anticipated that it would be, and we actually discussed this at the last meeting, sole management necessarily by the university. I think what we talked about was it would be RAs cited at a minimum in the building through some arrangement or agreement between BET and the university, but that didn't necessarily mean that BET wouldn't also have management as part of their role at the facility. And we don't want to eliminate that as a possibility through the ordinance language, I don't think. I think we need to leave that flexible so that, you know, the university and BET can work through an acceptable arrangement that meets the goals that John just identified when we get to that point.
And I mean, Brian, maybe you guys need to work through those arrangements and come back to us so we understand what it is, because I can't draft this in a vacuum. And that's why I use broad terms, leased and managed, because to me that I didn't use specifics of RAs, security, and shuttles. I mean, it's hard to know what exactly your arrangement's going to be.
I think if Allison and I have an opportunity to review the language, we can get it where it satisfies what we need to be able to do when we put pen to paper on those arrangements. I think that's all we need the opportunity to do. I don't think we need to wait for anything other than us having an opportunity to review the ordinance.
So Brian, let me ask you, so when you say put pen to paper, are you saying that managed by will mean a contractual obligation between you and the property owner, the university and the property owner?
Yes, some type of agreement. I mean, obviously, if the university is going to have RAs in the building, then there'll have to be an agreement between BET and the university that establishes the parameters of the location of the RAs.
Kristen, would you be opposed to having the word manage or let's see, lease to or a management contract with a school? I just don't like the way that contract is not put in there. An obligation is missing from the language from my perspective. A lease to me infers a specific contractual arrangement.
No, that's fine.
Managed by a preferred
management
contract with a school.
That's fine.
And how would we?
Yeah.
How would we handle the issue of, you know, it's simplified words like we've just described, but what the underlying intention of how to do it is? How would that be managed within the overall approval process? So yes, the property owner provides facility management, some security, some this, that, and the other, but the university is providing, you know, the 2 or 3, 4 things that we've already described. How would that be played out through an actual approval process for a specific building project?
Well, that's it. Sort of one leads to the next. So my next question on this list is, how do you want to see if you allow this, if we define the use that requires the management contract between the two entities and you allow the use in the PUC, I'm assuming you want to do it by conditional use. So we could develop conditional use criteria for that specific use, and the applicant's burden would to demonstrate compliance with those criteria. So that we could build that into the criteria that they have to demonstrate, show us that you have the management contract, and we could specifically call out what are some things that need to be included in that management contract. in terms of what is the university's participation in how that building is operated.
Yeah, excuse me, would that also include what the definition of an RA is and what their duties were then, correct?
I mean, I haven't gotten that far, but I think we could include that.
As a general approach, that's how we would get to the more specifics through a conditional use requirement on you know, these 3 or 4 things have to be met for approval. Is that correct?
That was my thought process, yeah.
So I personally, I think that would satisfy me. Where are the other board members with the student housing language and the process we've just described?
I'm good with it.
I agree.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
It was Robin. I was just saying I agreed to it.
Yeah, it works for me as well. I'd like to see the words though on the paper, but I think the general concept we're talking about is what I think we've have come to an agreement on or consensus on.
So remember that this, before, all the uses were uses that the university was proposing to develop, and as part of their conditional use, they were required to submit a master plan that showed all of the development that they're proposing, at least at that time. And there was also many supplemental reports that they had to provide that showed that they were doing sort of long-range planning to justify the development that was being built and the different amenities that they were going to need, maybe not specific to one lot or one building, but overall for all of what they were planning. So that concept doesn't really work when you have a one lot situation that's not owned by the university. And what's being proposed is I'll call it an apartment building for students, student housing. So that's where I just wanted to make sure, because Allison and I had conversation before that if you wanted to see a private entity do what I'll call a smaller scale of master planning, they can only really do what's publicly available unless we make the university be an applicant with the private entity. So I just want to make sure that you're comfortable that we're not, for this particular use, we would not be going down the path of how the ordinance has been drafted to date. We would be really approving this type of a building through just your normal conditional use criteria. Specific, again, we get into the details of the RA and potentially, shuttles and things like that. But that would really be on an isolated lot basis for where the student housing is being proposed versus looking at it from a more global perspective.
So Kristen, that's kind of a follow-on issue relative to, even the concept of allowing the student housing, which is where we started tonight with. We've got to the point where we believe from a private entity perspective, we've got language that we're happy with. And I would like to hear Ashley say that she's okay with it too. But the follow-on now is that we've got a situation where, well, there's a potential property that could move forward with that, but we don't have the intention around, well, is that the right location? What does the master plan want? Because we haven't done the master planning yet. So from my perspective, it seems a little bit of putting the cart before the horse in terms of allowing one project to go ahead when the intention of this whole approach was to look at what the master plan was, recognizing that probably that is a great location for a little bit of additional student housing. But how do we get what the overall plan should be if we start approving things with, well, here's the first one out of the gate and we need to move it forward?
I agree with you. It's not at all what we had envisioned when we started down this path, but by allowing a private entity be the applicant, it's hard to make them, unless you make the university be the applicant, BET doesn't know what the university's planning for their 5-year plan in terms of development. So I think you have to either not allow it by a private entity and make the university be the applicant and have it be part of your master planning process, or you do it the way we're doing it and allow, because again, it all sort of ties together. In the master plan concept, when the university was putting together a global development plan of all that they proposed in a certain time frame, we were agreeing that for the area and bulk requirements, they were looking at the entire district. So the setbacks were set, but it was set back from the district boundaries. The impervious coverage was measured on district boundaries, not a lot boundary. But now if you have BET owning a singular lot for a singular building, how do we measure their impervious cover based on the rest of the PUC of land they don't own? They don't control and they don't know what the university is going to be building there. So it just becomes, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me to do it that way. But it just, that's why I'm having this conversation. I don't want to go down a path that wasn't what you guys were thinking and contemplating.
Kristen, from a planning perspective, I would think there would be another option short of the two you mentioned, or in addition to the two you mentioned, which would be that if the private student housing that's developed in accordance with an agreement between the university and the private developer is developed ahead of an approved master plan, that ultimately when the master plan is submitted, it should take into consideration the situs or location and prior development of the student housing. And then, you know, the university and BET would just have to have something in their agreement that would cover whatever is being done to accommodate that within the confines of the ultimate master plan that happens after the fact. But for example, you know, obviously the university is going to want to consider, you know, the pedestrian access coming out of that facility, leading into, you know, the balance of its campus and things like that. I'm not sure about, I'll have to think through, and we'll have to talk a little bit more about the area and bulk issue, the impervious and things like that. But in terms of just the global planning and achieving the ultimate goals of the ordinance from a master planning perspective, I would think that would accommodate that issue and allow that to still function where, you know, the private developer still could go through and get the housing put in on the singular lot. And then when the university gets its conditional use for its master plan for any other projects, it's going to undertake administrative buildings, whatever it might be. You know, that can also be taken into consideration at that time.
Not sure how I understand how we would word that into an ordinance, and we also don't have any, if and when they move this forward and BET builds their building, but then the university says we're not doing any more building for quite some time, we're not putting together a master plan, and we're stuck with a lot with the student housing building that was built. And I'm just not sure I understand how what uses articulated gets into words in an ordinance.
Again, I think it comes back. Sorry, go ahead, John.
I was just going to ask Kristen, is there any way we could tie a private developer option with developing student housing to the conditional use requirement for the university to come up with a 5-year plan? I'm afraid, and I heard what you just said, that there's no real incentive for the university to come up with a 5-year plan if we allow a student developer to build student housing, which is what they're basically, I guess, are looking for right now immediately. And we lose that leverage over the university or the incentive for the university to pursue it.
Yeah, I don't think we can. I don't think we can hold a private, by saying it's allowed by conditional use, you're saying that use is appropriate there. I don't see how you put the onus on a private developer to force another entity that they don't control and the land they don't control to make them do anything.
These are good discussions, but I think these are things we can address in the ordinance as long as we're aware that there are issues that are important to the board. As John, you said before, if Kristen puts a draft together and Allison and I get a chance to weigh in on it, I think we can address these issues in the ordinance. I really do.
I've tried. That's why we're having this meeting. I have sat down and thought about it and tried. It's not as easy as you say to just write it into an ordinance. It's really not that easy. I need to understand if they want a student housing development to go separate and apart from master plan by the university. That I can easily draft. If they want it to be tied to a master plan concept, that I can do too, but then it's going to really depend upon the private entity and the university working together to really get substantive information, real planning documents that justify what's being built, where it's being built, and how it connects to the rest of the campus.
I'm afraid, Brian, I kind of am on where Kristen is at this point. I don't like the idea of this one-off, build some more student housing, and then we've got this overlay in, and there's no commitment or information around what the ultimate master planning approach is. I mean, to be perfectly honest, at this point, I'd rather just have an overlay with no student housing allowed, make you do the master plan, and come back and revise the ordinance, because it is a better opportunity to include some student housing in the PUC overlay, but not to have it in from day one, just so the first thing done is build another Edge 2. That's where I'm hearing this conversation today based on what Kristen's explained.
I agree with that.
Well, if that's what your thinking is, I guess all I can ask for is the opportunity to work with Kristen and Allison to come up with a mechanism in the ordinance that would get you comfortable with the issue you're struggling with, because I believe we can do it.
I think what we're missing here is a feeling, an obligation on the part of the university for that master plan. We want to know what you guys have in mind.
I think I understand where you're coming from and what your issue is, and I believe that we could come up with something to include in the ordinance that would get the board comfortable, short of just throwing out the idea of having the student housing available now. I think we could come up with something that would address your concerns, and I'd like the opportunity to do that.
Brian, where is the university with, assume that the student housing issue didn't come up, and assume that we were able to have passed this ordinance, April or May of 2020. What would the university, I mean, obviously forget COVID. COVID has put everybody back, and the priorities with not even students being there, it's really, upset the apple cart. But do you know, would the university have started on putting together a master plan for proposed development that they want to do in the next 5-10 years?
Absolutely.
Okay, so it sounds to me like,
remember going back,
let me finish. So it sounds to me like you can do student housing, and it really is a co-applicant situation where the private entity and university are the co-applicants on a master plan. And one part of that master plan is a student housing development on a lot owned by BET, but contractually obligated to be managed with the university. So it seems like you aren't putting the cart before the horse. I mean, that's probably not what BET wants to hear as far as timing, but it accomplishes the goal of not letting further what we'll call university development, because it really is, go forward without understanding how that development relates to the entirety of the campus, and how the impact upon the neighbors, whether they be borough residents or West Goshen residents, are accounted for. That was really why we started down this path. And I think it can be done if this building or this use gets put into an overall master plan. And the same things that needed to be done for a master plan for an administrative building or a classroom building or a theater or whatever, that same kind of planning document should be put together for student housing. It's now, though, you need to work together with a private entity. So it seems like if the board's willing to consider that, that can be done, but it's definitely not going to be on the same track that BET probably expects. I don't think we can ever make all parties happy here. I think that's where we're at in terms of, if we really want to accomplish the goal of how this ordinance started, we're going to have to tie the student housing into a master planning process, and we're going to have to work together.
I'm, a little bit of this is out of the box with any recent conversation I've had with my client, so I can only just try to think out loud a little bit, and I have to discuss this with my client. But I don't know that it's a problem to ramp up the master plan effort, because there's other projects like the administration buildings that we started working on. I don't know, Casey, how long ago was that? 5 years ago that we had filed for the. Yeah, so, I mean, the university has been waiting to get through this process and has put those projects on hold and is ready to move forward with them. So I don't know that I see a problem with ramping up the master planning effort so that the township can be comfortable with that in conjunction with the student housing. I think the student housing at this point of where we are needs to be included in the ordinance. And I don't believe that BET needs to be a co-applicant on the master plan because they're fitting into the university's master plan. They have a role in that, certainly, but I don't know that I agree that they're a co-applicant because the master plan is all about university, West Goshen campus wide issues, and BET has little knowledge about that. Their only real role is how the student housing facility fits in, and I think we can work with them and get them to participate and collaborate with us in that process so that they can get down the path on their approval for the student housing. And maybe that master plan, maybe the board should have the latitude at least of approving the student housing, even if the master planning conditional use is still going on, if they get comfortable with it. If not, they could wait until that's finally approved. But I think that's something we could build into the ordinance and get to work on.
Just curious, Brian, can you give a timeline on, let's just say if you got the go-ahead or the university decided to start developing the master plan and all the components as currently outlined in our ordinance, how long do you think that process would take? You have a ballpark idea?
I've never done it before, John, because I've been waiting for the ordinance for 4 years, but I have to guess there's a lot of reporting and information gathering, a lot of consultation. I think if we really had to push it, we could do it in 6 to 8 months.
All right.
What are the board thoughts or questions at this time?
I think it's important for the BET and university to work out what this is going to be before we start making too many decisions. I think it's important for us to see that there is going to be basically either a contract, a management agreement, and it would be helpful to us to be able to have the the larger plan. We needed that. We've been talking about that for several years, and we were basically getting off the ground to start trying to do some of that work. And I think we need to do that if we're going to continue to decide on this being a master plan.
Well, Robin, can I ask a question about that?
Sure.
Are you saying that you'd like to see kind of what Sean was saying, which is that the ordinance would require the university to do its master planning in order for the BET to have its student housing facility? That would be a requirement of the ordinance once it's adopted. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think it's important for the township to have some preview of what this is going to look like and make us feel more comfortable as we go, if you're going to go forward with BET. We still have some concerns about, whether or not this, John just asked the question, how long would it take? We don't want to make it difficult for you guys to move forward, but at the same time, I think we want to make sure that we've done our due diligence and that we have the confidence that the university is actively pursuing this relationship.
Well, the way that we would do that is by putting it in the ordinance, because we can't do an agreement, and I can't get funding to do master planning unless I have an ordinance that entitles me to do it.
So we got a chicken and the egg process going on right now?
No, I don't think it's chicken and the egg. I think we build the requirements that satisfy the board's concerns into the ordinance. And then when the ordinance is approved, then the university and BET have to get to work. I think it's that straightforward. And as long as we build the requirements into the ordinance that address the board's concerns, which I fully am 100% confident we can do, then I think we can get down the path, and the board stays in control even after the ordinance is approved because it's a conditional use.
Yeah, okay.
Ashley, any thoughts?
I'm just thinking, what is that language going to look like?
You, any other comments?
I think Robin summed it up. I think we should let the two legal beagles go at it and get it straightened out and come back to us.
There's three legal beagles, Hugh.
Okay. Sorry about that. I forgot Allison. Okay.
Let me just feed back something here. So, the board's been trying to help you here. We've been working on this, certainly, myself included now, for 12, 18 months. We've refined our ordinance. We took into account resident concerns. We've refined the overlay districts. We've added student housing language in. We've beaten it around several times. And it comes down to this fact that you won't start the master planning until the ordinance is passed. So unless you put the effort in to come up with a language that's going to help us satisfy that we're not going to end up with spot building here and a spot building there, because you can do it now the ordinance passed and there's still no real master plan on how it all fits together, unless the ball is in your court, in my opinion, now to come up with something that this board will accept. We've been paying for Kristen to work it up, and I think it's time for you to come up with something that can help. As you've heard these conversations several times, I really think the ball is in your court.
And that's fine. I mean, to reiterate what Brian said, I think we can get together and work on language. This conversation was helpful for us, and I think we can, put something together. I think having pen to paper and having something for you to chew on, we're happy to put that together.
Thank you.
Kristen, have you any final comment on that?
No, that's helpful. Thank you.
All right, are we done with this conversation, or is there any other comments to be had tonight?
Well, I just want to, I don't want to throw a caveat in all this, but Sean, do you want to raise any concerns about the size of the PUC area that would allow student housing, or do you just want to let that be tabled at this time?
I think I want to table it at this time, John. It's my personal view, unless the board wants to continue to work it. I feel we really need to get over this student housing issue in terms of how it's connected to the master planning. And, yeah, there are other issues to work, but, if you want to work them tonight, that's okay. But to me, I want to know how we're going to resolve this key sticking point.
All right, fine.
All right, well, that moves us on to the next agenda item, I believe. So thank you, Brian and Allison and John for attending, and hopefully we can still keep moving this forward. So we look forward to hearing from you.
Sean, can I just get a point of clarification so I'm clear moving forward, please?
Mm-hmm.
So this won't be on the township agenda again until we've had a chance, Allison and Kristen and I, to work through the language that we think will address the board's concerns, and then the three of us will bring it back to the board at one of your meetings so we can review the language, and maybe you'll get a copy of it ahead of time so you can look at it, and then we'll discuss it at one of your future meetings. Is that how we're proceeding?
Yeah, I mean, my personal view, and the rest of the board can weigh in, is that's the action, and until we see something in a form that we believe is worth, bringing to the public meeting and deliberating on it, it's with you. And if we get to a point that it's something you have something for us to consider, we can put it on an agenda in the future.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much for your time. Have a nice evening.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Allison.
Thank you.
Okay, so agenda item number 6 is approval of the bills to be paid for the general fund, the sewer revenue fund, the waste and recycling fund, and the capital reserve fund. Is there a motion to pay the bills?
Yes, I make the motion to pay the bills.
I'll
You.
second it.
Use the second.
Thank you.
Are there any board questions or comments on the bills? Casey, do you want to maybe just give us an overview of why it's a good idea from the township staff perspective to approve the bills twice a month now that we have a regular 2 meeting a month schedule?
Yeah, we wanted to start taking advantage of these 2 meetings a month to pay bills twice a month. For the rest of the month, outside of the normal bills list, you also approve a long list of manual checks that we have to cut every week. Those checks are for things that can't wait, such as utility bills, health insurance benefits, et cetera. And now with 2 standard kind of meetings a month, we can pay those monthly bills twice a month, which will greatly cut down on our use of manual checks.
Great. Any questions, comments on the bills to be paid by the board? Are there any public comments or questions on the bills?
Hi there, Sean. It's Margie.
Hey, Margie, go ahead.
I sent a late email this afternoon. I don't know if staff or any of the board members had a chance to look at it, but I'll just run through the questions anyway.
Go ahead.
The morning call subscription, just wondering why we're paying for a morning call subscription.
We subscribe to several regional newspapers, so we know what's going on in the world. We subscribe to the Daily Local, the Enquirer, and the Morning Call as the next biggest regional paper.
Okay, I understand the Daily Local and the Enquirer. Just a little confused about the Morning Call, but okay. And then the facilities, I saw that we paid $432 roughly to Timothy Off Heating for a toilet leak and a police department sink drain clog, and just wondering why our facilities maintenance employee can't handle minor repairs like that.
They weren't minor repairs, and our facilities person is not a plumber. He would do more damage than any fixes.
Oh, okay. I was so proud of myself. I fixed an upstairs toilet last week in my own house. Anyway, then $41,000 replacement utility truck. What happened to the truck that was replaced?
Those are trade-ins.
Okay. Do you recall how much money we got on that trade-in?
I don't.
Okay. And was that truck bid out?
We buy them only on CoStars. We do not have to bid the trucks.
Okay. And then the face masks, I thought it was $3 million that the county spent, and then I pulled up an article and saw that.
I checked that article. That was last August. All of those face masks went to the hospitals and first responders. We did not have any allocated to the township.
Okay.
They weren't for us by any means.
All right. And then the last question I have is these Carroll engineering bills really concern me. How do you determine what's being paid from the general fund and what's being paid from the capital reserve fund?
The things such as the paving program, if we do any inspections, those come out of the general fund. What you see coming out of the capital reserve fund is Ravens Lane, any design in stormwater that the board's approved. So it's generally stormwater coming out of capital reserve, and that's where the bills are allocated.
Okay, and then since you mentioned Ravens Lane, and I have that highlighted, I'll ask on that. So it's showing, say, let's roughly, I don't know, $1,200, not $1,200, $11,000, $12,000 for Ravens Lane. Wasn't that cost, that project was all bid out to a company. So why are we incurring such large engineering fees for that?
Well, we have an engineer overseeing the project, and we have inspections daily, which are coming in very handy because, as Mr. Hellman has seen, we have multiple utility conflicts that the contractor keeps finding. So we have full-time inspection. unlike what happened back in the 60s when this project was built, we had no inspections back then, and here we are today.
Okay, and then on the other one, road construction materials, again, I don't know why road construction materials is going to Carroll Engineering, but
That's the catch-all for engineering for the road projects that we do every year.
Woodlands at Greystone, Greystone Elementary, another Woodlands at Greystone. Shouldn't that be school district or the developer paying those bills? Why are we paying for Boot Road? I'm sorry, for Greystone Elementary and Woodlands projects.
We've never charged the school district either building permit fees or inspection fees because it's all of your tax money, no matter where it's coming from. And on the, I'm sorry, the second one was what, the Woodlands at Greystone?
Yes.
Okay, those are separate inspections for the sewer laterals, which I then bill NV Homes for. So we get reimbursed periodically from NV Homes.
Okay, and then 2021 pavement, I see on that like a $17,000 and another, I think there was another large expense. So
Sure.
what would that large expense be for 2021 pavement repair?
Probably part of the survey and the creation of the plans and bid documents.
Okay, and then one last question on that. How do we decide what is handled in-house by our in-house engineer versus what we're paying Carroll Engineering for? To me, as a layman and someone who's watched over the years, why can't our in-house engineer handle a lot of these functions?
We'd have to have 2 or 3 in-house engineers. There's no way in the world Rick could handle all this work.
You'd probably have to have closer to 5, to be honest with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rick handles all the regular development. So, I mean, there's no hard and fast rule, Margie, but you're talking about a lot of special projects that come up versus just run-of-the-mill land development. So, exactly. I mean, it's a lot of work.
Okay, and I know I said that last time. Boot Road, last time I questioned these Carroll Engineering bills, I had asked about Boot Road traffic. There was many thousands of dollars for Boot Road traffic. And
Sure.
again, this month I see about $10,000 for Boot Road traffic. What is being done there? I don't see anything being done there.
What do you mean you don't see anything being done? I don't understand.
Boot Road, wasn't that the restriping and the traffic signals?
Yeah, we're still waiting for PennDOT approval for the signal permit plan.
So what are we being charged tens of thousands of dollars for Boot Road?
For redoing the signal plan and redoing the PennDOT plans.
Okay, it just seems like we've paid them a lot of money a couple months ago for that project as well.
We have. PennDOT keeps coming back with new requirements and new comments. So we have to address them or we can't do the project.
So are these bills looked at by Rick Craig or Finance Department, or is the board just approving these and nobody's really audited them in-house?
We don't audit invoices, Margie. Several department heads and I review all the bills coming in. The Finance Department has no idea what these projects are. The department heads, myself, review the invoices.
So when you review them, though, do you like initial them or anything so the township knows that somebody kind of audited them to make sure we're not being overbilled? And I'm not just specifically talking about Carroll Engineering at this point. I'm just talking about in general.
Yes, all of the invoices that come through the township are reviewed by each department head if it's their department.
Okay, so there's a signature or initial on them, on every bill or invoice that it was looked at.
Margie, that's an internal control situation that is addressed by the auditors every year, and they have said repeatedly that we have one of the best internal control systems going. So that's what you rely on for those kind of things.
Can I just address the internal controls? There's no need to put your signature on an invoice because we use a very advanced software in Munis that whoever is actually processing those invoices and approving them, we will know it. So it doesn't really matter about putting any kind of mark on the actual paper itself.
Okay.
And so when the auditor looks at that, they go into the Munis system and they can see it?
Yeah, that they review the PO lists and everything else that are approved by the department heads and the staff. I mean, the purchase orders are approved by 4 or 5 people through the chain, so.
Okay. And one other thing going forward, back to the Woodlands at Greystone. So the reason I ask about that walking path along Aram Avenue, I've been over there and walking on that. My normal walking path is not maintained through winter snow and ice. So I found an alternate, and it's really quite lovely. And I park at the dog park. And if you walk down Aram Avenue till the end and back to your car at the dog park, it's a perfect 3.1 5K miles. And I just don't know how going forward that's gonna, you can say that's HOA trail. I think the township's gonna have to take that on.
No, absolutely not. That was discussed throughout the conditional use process, and the board at the time did not want to take on the maintenance of a 10-foot wide paved trail. It's outside of the right of way, and the HOA is responsible to maintain it.
That being said, though, I don't believe there's no way for them to tell who are the 569 residents versus the regular public.
No,
So for all intents and purposes, Margie,
Kristen, that's not
I
a
walked
question.
it too,
That's
and I
not
don't think they're going to be stopping us.
Right.
Kristen, that's not the question.
No, I know, but I mean, her point was that she wants it to be open to the public, and I think it will be.
It will be de facto, absolutely.
Yeah.
We're not going to stop people from using it, neither will the HOA.
Neither will the HOA.
No.
Okay. I think in the future they're going to try, though, because they're going to be paying for it with HOA fees. So I just think it's going to be a problem going forward. And, I don't know what you need to do about it, but I just to put it on your radar that it's going to be issues, I think, in the future.
There's going to be 162 acres of open space dedicated to the township, and within that 162 acres, there's a vast trail network there too.
7 miles of trails.
So there'll be other trails.
Margie, let's cross the bridge when we come to it. Let's see if there's really a problem or not. We don't want to invent problems if they're not actually going to exist. So, do you have any other questions, Margie, on the bills?
Nope, that's it. Thank you.
Not inventing problems. She's asking very good, sincere, good questions.
But it's a future problem that may or may not exist, so it's not one we have today.
If it may or may not exist, it's not inventing. I agree, but that's.
Yeah. All right, is there any other questions or comments from the public on the bills? Are there any other public comments for the meeting not related to agenda items?
Yeah, we got to call the vote on the bills, don't we,
Sean?
We
do. You're right. Thank you, Hugh.
I forgot. I was thinking.
I appreciate that. Yes. So the bills. We've had a motion and a second, so it's time for a roll call vote. Ashley.
Aye.
John.
Aye.
Hugh.
Aye.
Robin.
Aye.
Sean says aye. Are there any other public comments for the meeting tonight?
I have one. Has to do with the, as I mentioned it earlier, has to do with the annual car show that we've had. It's scheduled for May 22nd. As to whether it's going to be held or not. With the governor now loosening requirements and it being an outside function, I think that it can be planned so that it falls within the guidelines of the authorities so that we can actually hold it. We need within the next couple of weeks to be able to begin the final planning if we're going to hold it. And I need to know, I specifically, because I'm on the committee for the car club, need to know that we are able to have it. So if we can have a short discussion of that.
Okay, so what do we need to discuss, Hugh?
Well, are we going to have it? So are we allowed to have it?
How many people at the car show?
There are somewhere in the neighborhood of, and historically there's been 70 to 80 cars. which is usually 1.5 per person, per car, 1.5 persons per car.
And
But it is
what-
outside, so there's being outside, there's really not a limit there.
And where would this be held, Hugh?
That we use the parking lot behind ARC down by Ice Line at the end of the road at Ice Line.
What are
There's
the
a big parking lot.
What are the governor's restrictions now? Because they just changed, right? Like, what's the rule for being outside?
I think, well,
There-
that's the funny thing, because it's mostly to do with stadiums and facilities. This is just a park that we don't have any, that we don't have a attendee maximum at Community Park. That's the problem. But now it's up to, I think, 20% of the capacity of the facility, but there is no capacity for Community Park. So
I think we should allow it to happen. If they want to do it, I think we should allow it to happen. It's outside. I honestly don't think it's going to be a big deal, as long as there's social distancing and masking.
Come May, probably be even less restrictions by May. So
Could be.
Actually, we could plan it. You can always cancel it if it gets worse, but I think chances are, Biden's talking about having everybody vaccinated by the end of May. So we should be in much better shape by then, I would think.
Yes.
I would agree with you, John. Robin, you started to say something.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, Casey or Derek. I had a couple of residents in S2 with an interest in whether or not the township is having activities during the summer. Are they going to be able to open up in that respect?
we're planning for it. Hopefully we'll get more guidance from the Commonwealth soon. Ken and Tom are starting the hiring process for summer camp. We've pushed back, the Park and Rec Board has pushed back the concert series to start later in the summer. By that time, we should get some better vaccines here. And then we'll do movies in the park in the later fall.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure.
So Hugh, just to be clear on the car event, you're going to follow the protocols, right? It's going to continue to be whatever requirements there are for masking and social distancing, etc.
Correct.
Okay.
Do we need a vote?
Do we need a motion on this?
No. I don't think we've ever done a motion to ballot before, so I don't think it's necessary.
No, I think it's just consensus that it can go forward.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I'm on board too, so.
Okay. Okay, so I can take it back to my board on the car club and say, let's go.
Thank goodness.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the understanding and the help.
You're
And
welcome.
Casey, I'll get you the insurance paperwork as usual. I guess it goes to you, or does it go to Ken?
Nope, send it to me, please.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
Any other comments or issues for the board tonight?
Yeah, I just want to get an update. Bill, could you let us know as far as the new website, which by the way looks really nice, looks really good, on the employment or the jobs drop-down menu, how close are we on being able to post the job opportunities for the township?
Probably by the end of the week, I have a general sewer one and a general labor for streets one. So there should be 2 jobs by week's end.
Okay.
Do you have price ranges on those, Derek?
No, we didn't discuss putting salary ranges on there.
No, we never do.
Yeah.
Okay. That's then dependent on the talent of the individual, I take it.
And how long would they stay posted until they get filled?
I think there are several positions available, but So we will keep it posted. And I was talking to Dave, and probably the strategy is to keep posted until filled, essentially. Yeah.
Okay, well, that makes sense, why wouldn't you? Okay. All right, looking forward to it.
I'll make the motion, we adjourn. Is it time?
I think so, Hugh. Has anyone got anything else? If not, we've got a motion from Hugh. I'll second the motion. All in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
Thanks,
Meeting
everybody.
is adjourned.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Good night.